Life had always been steady for me. I wasn't the type to seek out chaos or complication. I believed in hard work, deep love, and finding joy in the little things. My wife, Jessica, was my rock, and our daughter, Hannah, was the light of my life. At least, that's what I thought before my carefully built world crumbled. I was 37, a construction foreman, managing projects across the city of Columbia Falls, Montana. Jessica, 35, worked part-time as a paralegal while balancing life at home with Hannah, who had just turned 6. Our lives seemed ordinary but fulfilling. Little did I know, a simple decision would unravel everything. It all started with one of those Ancestry DNA test kits. It was a promotional gift from work, and my colleagues were buzzing about uncovering their family heritage. Curious, I decided to send in my sample. It seemed harmless, even fun, a chance to confirm the family stories about our Irish roots. When the results arrived, I opened the email with anticipation. But instead of discovering lineage surprises, I found something that made my heart stop. According to the test, Hannah wasn't biologically related to me. My hands shook as I reread the report. It had to be a mistake. There was no way the little girl I'd held moments after her birth, whose scraped knees I'd kissed and bedtime stories I'd read, wasn't my daughter. I didn't confront Jessica right away. I told myself there had to be some mix-up with the lab or a glitch in the system. For days, I tried to push it out of my mind, but it gnawed at me. Jessica's sudden unease whenever I mentioned the test and her nervous glances when we were alone made it harder to ignore. Finally, one evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. As we sat together after dinner, Hannah asleep upstairs, I turned to Jessica, the words catching in my throat. "Jessica," I began, my voice uneven. "I need to ask you something about Hannah." Her face paled. "What about her?" she asked, her voice almost too casual. I took a deep breath. "I got the DNA results back. They don't match." For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Jessica's hands trembled as she set her glass of wine down. "Daniel, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me the truth," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "I deserve to know." Tears welled in her eyes, and she clutched her arms as if bracing against a storm. "It was years ago. We were going through a rough patch. You were so busy with work, and I felt invisible. I made a mistake, once. I never meant for it to affect our family." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else she said. The woman I had trusted, the mother of my child, had betrayed me. "Hannah isn't mine," I said, my voice cold and unfamiliar. Jessica shook her head frantically. "She's yours in every way that matters. You're the only father she's ever known, Daniel. Please, don't let this destroy us." But I couldn't hear her pleas. My mind was already spinning with the implications, the years of lies, the foundation of our life together suddenly feeling like quicksand. "Who?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Who's her biological father?" Jessica hesitated, then whispered, "A man I worked with, years ago. His name's Ryan. He moved away after it happened. He's never been a part of Hannah's life, and he never will be." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they had the opposite effect. The thought of another man's shadow hanging over my family was unbearable. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and stormed out into the chilly Montana night. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Columbia Falls, the headlights carving paths through the darkness. My thoughts raced, my heart heavy with betrayal and anger. How could Jessica, the woman I'd built my life with, do this to me? And what about Hannah? She was innocent in all of this, yet her existence now felt like a cruel twist of fate. When I returned home hours later, Jessica was waiting for me, her face tear-streaked. "Daniel," she began, reaching out for me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Don't," I said, my voice raw. "I can't even look at you right now." For days, I lived like a ghost in my own home, barely speaking to Jessica, avoiding Hannah's innocent questions about why Daddy seemed so sad. Every time I looked at her, my heart ached. She was still my little girl, but the knowledge that she wasn't biologically mine poisoned every moment. The breaking point came late one evening as I sat in the living room, staring at Hannah's school photo hanging on the wall. Her bright smile and curly brown hair, a perfect reflection of her mother, felt like a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stay in a house filled with lies, couldn't face Jessica's pleading eyes or Hannah's innocent questions. That night, I packed a bag, leaving only a letter on the kitchen counter. In the letter, I poured out everything, the pain, the betrayal, the shattered trust. I told Jessica I needed to leave, to figure out who I was outside of the wreckage of our marriage. I didn't say where I was going, because the truth was, I didn't know. The road stretched out before me as I drove east, the dark Montana wilderness swallowing me whole. Every mile felt like both an escape and a weight pressing heavier on my chest. I replayed Jessica's confession over and over, the words cutting deeper each time. When I reached the small town of Ashland, Oregon, I stopped. It was far enough away, quiet enough, and unfamiliar enough to start over. I rented a small room above a hardware store and found work at a local construction company. The days were long and grueling, but the physical labor dulled the sharp edges of my thoughts. In Ashland, I reinvented myself. I grew a beard, traded my old name for a new one, James Carter, and bought clothes that made me look like any other local worker. I didn't want anyone asking questions, least of all about where I'd come from. I threw myself into the work, taking on extra hours whenever I could. The monotony of hammering nails and lifting beams became my solace, each task a small barrier against the tidal wave of emotions threatening to drown me. The people in town were friendly enough, but I kept them at arm's length. I didn't trust myself to let anyone in, afraid they'd see the cracks in my facade. The only person I allowed into my life was Linda, the owner of a local diner called Ashland Eats. Linda was a sharp-witted woman in her late 50s, a widow who had seen her share of hardships. She ran the diner with a firm hand, her no-nonsense attitude a strange comfort to me. Over time, we developed a quiet camaraderie. "You've got the look of a man with a story," she said one evening as she refilled my coffee cup. I glanced up at her, unsure how to respond. "Don't worry," she added with a knowing smile. "I'm not asking. Just letting you know, I've been there." Her words stayed with me. Maybe Linda saw through the walls I'd built around myself, or maybe she just understood that some wounds were too deep to explain. Either way, her diner became my refuge, a place where I could sit in the corner and disappear into the background. Months passed, and I began to feel a fragile sense of stability. But even in this new life, I couldn't escape the memories of the family I'd left behind. One day, as I walked through the aisles of a local toy store, something caught my eye, a plush rabbit that looked just like Hannah's favorite toy. My chest tightened as the memory of her laughter filled my mind. I left the store in a daze, the ache of longing sharper than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of my small apartment, haunted by the image of Hannah's smile. I'd told myself I left for her sake, to give her a chance at a life free from my bitterness. But deep down, I knew I'd abandoned her in the cruelest way. Meanwhile, Jessica was relentless. Unbeknownst to me, she had spent the months since my departure searching for me. She hired private investigators, followed every lead, and refused to give up. Her determination wasn't just fueled by guilt, it was fueled by love, both for me and for the family we'd built. It was an overcast Wednesday when my past finally caught up with me. I had just finished a long shift at the construction site and was walking back to my apartment, the weight of exhaustion settling over me. When I turned the corner to my building, I saw her, Jessica. She was leaning against a dark sedan parked by the curb, her arms wrapped around herself as if shielding against the cold. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and her face looked thinner, marked with worry and fatigue. The sight of her stopped me in my tracks. My chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, I considered walking the other way. But the moment passed, and I forced myself to keep moving. "Daniel," she said as I approached, her voice soft but steady. "It's James," I corrected flatly. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "I needed to find you. To explain. To fix this." I didn't respond, my jaw tightening as I brushed past her toward the building's entrance. "Wait," she called after me. "Please. Hannah's in the car. She's been asking for you every day since you left." Her words made me stop. Slowly, I turned, and that's when I saw her, Hannah, sitting in the back seat, her small face pressed against the window. She looked older, her features more defined, but her bright eyes and shy smile were unmistakable. She waved hesitantly, her expression unsure. My heart felt like it was being ripped in two. "Can we come in?" Jessica asked. I didn't want to let them in. I didn't want them here, bringing the storm of emotions I'd tried so hard to escape. But I couldn't leave them standing outside in the cold. Without a word, I nodded and led them up to my small apartment. The room was cramped and sparse, with barely enough space for the three of us. Hannah clung to Jessica's side, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jessica broke the silence first. "I know you don't want to see me, but I couldn't let things end the way they did. You left us with nothing, Daniel, no explanation, no closure. Do you have any idea what that's done to Hannah?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I left a letter. It said everything that needed to be said." "A letter?" she shot back, her voice rising. "You abandoned your daughter with a letter? She's a child, Daniel. She doesn't understand why you left. She still thinks she did something wrong." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let it show. "She's not my daughter," I said coldly, my voice sharper than I intended. The room fell silent. Jessica's face crumpled, and tears welled in Hannah's eyes. The look of confusion and hurt on her small face broke something inside me. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Are you mad at me?" My chest tightened. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not mad at you." She took a tentative step toward me, then another, until she was close enough to wrap her small arms around my waist. I froze, the weight of her touch shattering the walls I'd built around myself. Jessica watched silently, her expression a mixture of sadness and relief. In that moment, holding Hannah in my arms, I realized that no DNA test could change what she meant to me. She was still my little girl, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest, who painted messy rainbows on the living room walls, who called me Daddy like it was the most natural thing in the world. The days that followed were surreal. Jessica and Hannah stayed in a nearby motel, but they spent most of their time with me in my small apartment. I wasn't ready to let them fully back into my life, but I couldn't bring myself to send them away either, especially Hannah. Jessica tried her best to tread lightly, giving me space and time. She knew how fragile the situation was and seemed willing to endure whatever it took to mend the damage she had caused. One evening, after Hannah had fallen asleep on my couch, Jessica and I sat across from each other in the quiet of the apartment. The soft hum of the heater was the only sound between us. "I never stopped loving you, Daniel," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I know I destroyed your trust, and I may never earn it back, but I can't give up on us. Not after everything." I studied her face, the vulnerability etched into every line. "You didn't just destroy my trust," I said, my voice low but firm. You destroyed everything I thought I knew about our life. About Hannah. About us. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she nodded. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I wanted to believe her. Part of me even wanted to forgive her, but the pain and betrayal still clung to me like a shadow. A few days later, while walking Hannah to the nearby park, something unexpected happened. As we crossed the street, a car came speeding around the corner. I reacted instinctively, grabbing Hannah and pulling her back onto the sidewalk just in time. She clung to me, her small body trembling in fear. It's okay, sweetheart, I whispered, holding her close. You're safe. I've got you. Her tears soaked into my jacket, and in that moment, something shifted. For months, I'd been consumed by my own anger and resentment, but as I held her, all I felt was an overwhelming need to protect her, to be there for her, no matter what. Later that evening, as I recounted the incident to Jessica, her face went pale. I can't imagine what I'd do if something happened to her, she said, her voice shaking. Thank you, Daniel. For protecting her. For being there. Her gratitude was genuine, but it wasn't what struck me. It was the realization that, no matter how much I tried to distance myself, I couldn't deny the bond one had with Hannah. She wasn't just Jessica's daughter or Ryan's biological child, she was mine in every way that mattered. That night, I sat Jessica down for a long overdue conversation. I can't promise that I'll ever forgive you, I said, my voice steady. But I can't keep punishing you either. It's not fair to Hannah, and it's not fair to me. If we're going to try to move forward, we need to face everything. No more secrets. Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and trepidation. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Ryan, I said, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. Does he know about Hannah? She shook her head. No. He moved away not long after it happened, and I never told him. He was never part of her life, and he doesn't need to be. I nodded, her words sinking in. It wasn't just about Ryan or the mistakes Jessica had made, it was about the life we had built, the family we tried to create, and whether or not we could salvage it. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Jessica and I worked hard to rebuild trust, though the road was anything but smooth. There were arguments, moments of doubt, and lingering pain, but there were also glimmers of hope. Hannah's joy became the glue that held us together. Her laughter filled the small apartment, her curiosity and boundless energy reminding me of why I had fallen in love with being her dad in the first place. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Hannah leaned her head against my arm. Daddy, she said softly, are you happy now? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at her, her wide eyes staring up at me with a mixture of innocence and hope. I'm getting there, I said, wrapping my arm around her. Months passed, and slowly, life began to take on a new rhythm. Jessica moved into a modest rental house near my apartment, giving us both the space we needed while allowing Hannah to spend time with both of us. The arrangement was far from perfect, but it worked, for now. Jessica continued to show her remorse in every way she could. She picked up a job at a local bakery, often working long hours to make ends meet. Her resilience and determination to rebuild our family, no matter how fractured, didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as the three of us sat together at the small dining table in Jessica's new place, Hannah brought out a picture she'd drawn. It was simple, a house, 3 stick figures holding hands, and a sun smiling down on them. She pointed to the figures one by one. That's Mommy, that's me, and that's you, Daddy. I felt a lump form in my throat. I hadn't lived under the same roof as Hannah and Jessica in over a year, but in her mind, we were still a family. The real test came on a late summer evening when Jessica received a phone call. I could tell from her expression that something was wrong. What is it? I asked cautiously. It's Ryan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached out to an old coworker and found out about Hannah. He wants to meet her. The air in the room grew thick, and my chest tightened. What did you tell him? I haven't responded yet, she admitted. I wanted to talk to you first. I don't want him in her life, Daniel. She's happy the way things are, and I don't want to confuse her. I paced the room, my mind racing. The thought of Ryan, a stranger, but also the man who shared Hannah's DNA, entering her life made my stomach churn. But as much as I hated the idea, I couldn't ignore that it wasn't just about us anymore. It was about Hannah. She deserves to know the truth one day, I said finally. Maybe not now, but when she's old enough to understand. We can't keep it from her forever. Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. I'll tell him to wait. When the time is right, we'll tell her together. That night, after putting Hannah to bed, Jessica and I sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. The silence between us felt less heavy than it had in months. I don't know if things will ever go back to how they were, I said, breaking the quiet. Jessica nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I don't expect them to. I just want us to be okay. For Hannah's sake. For all of us. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm still angry, Jessica. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. But I don't want to keep running from this. From us. From her. She looked at me then, hope flickering in her eyes. Does that mean you'll stay? I nodded. It means I'm willing to try. One step at a time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw Jessica smile, not the hesitant, guilt-ridden smile I'd grown used to, but a real one. In the weeks that followed, Jessica and I began working on a new foundation, not as the couple we used to be, but as two people trying to co-parent and heal. We sought therapy, both together and individually, to confront the pain and resentment that lingered. It was messy and painful, but it felt like progress. Hannah remained the center of our world, her laughter and boundless love reminding us of what truly mattered. One day, while fishing with her at the local lake, she turned to me, her small face serious. Daddy, do you think we'll ever all live together again? I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. But what I do know is that no matter where we live, we'll always be a family. She smiled at that, her trust in me unwavering. As I watched her skip rocks across the water, I realized that the road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like we were moving forward, together.